In the private ballroom of the Daita estate, all eyes were fixed on a single figure. Christina Cosby, elegant in crimson silk and composed bearing, even though inside her pulse hammered with the recognition of a trap perfectly sprung. It was supposed to be a business consultation, the lucrative opportunity that would finally prove her brilliance to the financial world. And with it, the chance to escape the shadows of a past she'd spent her entire life running from. The atmosphere shifted when Kaihai Daita rose from his position of power, commanding and undeniable, the man who controlled every illicit dollar flowing through New York. For a brief moment, confusion flickered in Christina's dark eyes, as if the elegant dinner and assembled crime families were simply an elaborate networking event she'd misread. But the illusion didn't last. Before all present, warriors in tailored suits, matriarchs dripping in blood diamonds, entire criminal dynasties who awaited the spectacle, Kaihai crossed the marble floor and with a voice laden with absolute certainty declared that he had chosen her as his wife. He took her hand publicly, calling her extraordinary, capable of standing beside him as queen of his empire, reminding everyone that she was intelligent, beautiful, the perfect vessel for his heirs and his legacy. The hall erupted with applause and knowing smiles. Some raised glasses, others nodded in calculated approval. For Christina, it was as if a cage door had slammed shut around her. Still, she straightened her spine, refusing to tremble before those who had always viewed women as commodities to be claimed. With a firm voice, even though her heart raced with the danger of what she was about to do, she pulled her hand free and responded clearly, "I reject your proposal, Mr. Daita." The silence that followed was even more dangerous than Kaihai's declaration. He stared at her for an instant, and behind that controlled expression, there was something no one else perceived, a crack in the foundation, almost as if he himself were a prisoner of the obsession he had just revealed. But soon his jaw tightened, and with a subtle gesture that somehow contained volcanic fury, the air in the room turned frigid. And so, under the weight of shocked stares and suspended breath, Christina Cosby crossed the ballroom. For the assembled crime lords, it was a spectacle of the unthinkable, a woman refusing the most powerful man in New York. For her, it was the death of every safe path she had dared to imagine, and the birth of something far more dangerous. The heavy carved doors closed behind her with a sound that echoed like a death sentence. Outside, the Manhattan night was sharp and unforgiving, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and distant sirens. Christina walked through the columned entrance with measured steps, her spine straight despite the knowledge burning in her mind. She had just declared war on a man who had never lost. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her run in panic. Not yet. The Daita estate stretched before her in shadows and amber light, its fortress walls bearing witness to decades of blood and power consolidated in these very halls. Behind her, through the massive windows, she could see Kaihai Daita standing motionless, watching her leave, a predator who had just been denied for the first time in his reign. Christina descended the stone steps into the New York darkness, her crimson gown a defiant slash of color against the night. She had no way of knowing that this single moment of refusal would reshape the entire criminal underworld, or that the man she just rejected would become both her greatest enemy and the catalyst for discovering who she truly was, not a woman to be possessed, but an heir to a legacy of power that had been waiting in her bloodline all along. The game had begun, and this time Christina Cosby would play by her own rules. Before we continue, if you love stories about power, defiance, and women who refuse to be owned, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to know what city you're representing while Christina fights for hers. Now let's dive into her transformation. Christina ditched the crimson gown in a Chinatown alley, trading silk for jeans and a leather jacket purchased from a late-night thrift store with cash she'd had the foresight to keep in her clutch. By 3 in the morning, she was crossing the Brooklyn Bridge on foot, another shadow among the city's countless ghosts, her designer heels abandoned in a dumpster on Canal Street. The safe house was a 4th-floor walk-up in Sunset Park, the kind of building where neighbors knew better than to ask questions. She'd memorized the address years ago, when paranoia was just a survival instinct she couldn't quite shake. Now that paranoia was keeping her alive. Marcus Chin answered on the first ring despite the hour. "I wondered when you'd call. You saw the news?" Christina kept her voice low, watching the street below through gaps in the Venetian blinds. Christina, you rejected Kai Dita in front of the 5 families. That's not news, that's a declaration of war. The former FBI agent's voice carried equal parts admiration and concern. There's already chatter on every channel I monitor. He's mobilized his entire network. Her stomach tightened. How bad? $2 million. Alive and unharmed. Those were his exact specifications. Every bounty hunter, mercenary, and desperate criminal from here to Boston is looking for a woman in a red dress who disappeared from Manhattan 3 hours ago. Marcus paused. Christina, men have been killed for far less than embarrassing Kai Dita. The fact that he wants you breathing is almost worse. She closed her eyes, processing the implications. 2 million meant serious resources, professional hunters, people who wouldn't stop until they collected. Alive meant Kai wasn't finished with her. He wanted the opportunity to break her himself, to extract submission as payment for her defiance. I need your help, she said quietly. I figured. What are you thinking? Christina moved away from the window, her reflection catching in a cracked mirror across the room. She looked different already, hair pulled back, makeup gone, the polished financial analyst stripped away to reveal something harder underneath. Running won't work. He has too many resources, too much reach. Hiding just delays the inevitable. So what's the play? She met her own gaze in the mirror, seeing something she'd spent years trying to bury. The steal her mother had warned her about, the dangerous inheritance she'd rejected along with everything else from her past. I need to become someone he can't control. Someone he can't cage. Her voice hardened with new resolve. I need to stop being prey and become a predator he'll think twice about touching. Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something almost respectful. You know what you're really asking for, don't you? That's not a weekend crash course, Christina. That's a complete transformation. I know. She turned from the mirror, jaw set. When can you get here? The package arrived at dawn, delivered by one of Marcus's contacts with instructions to burn the outer wrapping. Inside was a single brass key and a handwritten address in Bed-Stuy, her mother's handwriting, preserved on paper that had yellowed with age. Christina stood in the cramped bathroom of the safe house, studying the elegant script that had once signed permission slips and birthday cards. Her mother had been dead for 3 years, a quiet funeral for a woman who'd lived a quieter life. Or so Christina had believed. The storage unit was in a facility that looked like it predated the neighborhood's gentrification by decades. Unit 247 sat in the basement level, its metal door covered in a fine layer of dust that suggested no one had touched it in years. The key turned with a resistant click. Inside, bankers' boxes lined the walls with military precision. Christina pulled the first one down, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the lid. Photographs spilled across the concrete floor. Her mother, impossibly young and fierce, standing beside men in suits that screamed old money and older violence. Her mother at a conference table, the only woman in a room full of predators, her expression commanding absolute attention. Her mother with a gun, competent and cold in a way Christina had never witnessed. The documents beneath told a story that rewrote everything Christina thought she knew. Corporate holdings traced through shell companies. Territory maps of major cities with annotations in her mother's precise hand. Ledgers recording transactions that numbered in the hundreds of millions. And at the center of it all, a family tree that made Christina's blood run cold. The Cosby Organization. Not just another crime family, but the architects who'd structured the modern criminal underground itself. Her grandmother, Vivian Cosby, had been called the architect, the woman who'd negotiated the peace that ended the bloodiest gang war in American history. Her great-uncle had controlled ports from Baltimore to Boston. Her mother, Elena Cosby, had been groomed as the heir apparent. Until she'd walked away. Christina found the letter in the bottom of the last box, sealed in wax with a symbol she now recognized from the documents. A serpent crowned with thorns. My darling Christina. If you're reading this, then the world I tried to protect you from has found you anyway. I'm sorry. I wanted you to have choices I never did, a life without blood on your hands or fear in your heart. But the Cosby legacy isn't something you can simply renounce. It lives in your bones whether you claim it or not. 20 years ago, I disbanded the organization because I couldn't bear the thought of you inheriting that throne. I scattered our people, liquidated our assets, and tried to become invisible. But power like ours doesn't disappear. It merely waits. The key to everything is in the red ledger. Names, locations, debts owed and favors banked. If you need it, if you have no other choice, then take what is yours by blood. Your Uncle Marcus still watches over some of the old guard. He'll know what to do. But Christina, remember this. The moment you claim the Cosby name, you can never be ordinary again. Choose wisely, my brilliant girl. Choose freedom if you can. With all my love, Mom. Christina's hands shook as she set the letter down. Through the small window near the ceiling, morning light filtered into the storage unit, illuminating dust motes that danced like spirits. Her mother had given her a choice. Remain Christina Cosby, the financial analyst, and likely die in Kai-Hi's gilded cage, or become Christina Cosby, the heir to an empire built on calculated violence and strategic fear. She reached for the red ledger, its leather cover smooth beneath her fingers. When she opened it, names leaped off the pages, names that still held power in the underworld's hidden hierarchies. Her mother had tried to save her from this legacy. Now that same legacy might be the only thing that could save her life. Christina pulled out her phone and typed a message to Marcus Chin. I need to find my uncle. The one my mother never talked about. The reply came within seconds. Marcus Cosby. I was wondering when you'd ask. He's expecting you. Marcus Cosby's gym occupied a forgotten corner of Red Hook, the kind of place where the sign had faded years ago and the windows were painted black for reasons no one questioned. Christina found him in the back room, a man in his 60s with silver threading through his dark hair and scars mapping a violent history across his knuckles. He didn't look up from the heavy bag he was methodically destroying. You have Elena's walk. Confident, like you own every room you enter. His fist connected with brutal precision. But you don't own anything yet, do you? I need your help. I know what you need. The question is whether you understand what you're asking for. He finally turned to face her, and Christina saw her mother's eyes staring back, sharp, calculating, unforgiving. Elena spent 20 years keeping you away from this life. You show up here because some mob prince bruised your ego. He put a $2 million bounty on me. Christina held his gaze. Alive. I rejected him in front of the 5 families, and now he wants to break me for it. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not quite approval, but recognition. You said no to Kai-Hi Daida? In his own house. I said no to being owned by anyone. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Elena had that same stubborn pride. It's what made her walk away from an empire. He picked up a towel, wiping his hands. And it's what got your grandmother killed when she refused to compromise with weaker men who thought they deserved her territory. Christina's chest tightened. Her mother had never spoken about how Vivian Cosby died. The Cosby women have always had fire, Marcus continued, circling her like a predator assessing prey. But fire without control just burns everything down, including yourself. Is that what you want? To burn. I want to survive. And then I want to make sure no one ever thinks they can cage me again. Marcus stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the old violence lingering in his eyes. Survival is easy. Any rat can hide in the walls long enough to outlive the cat. But what you're describing, that requires becoming the apex predator in a room full of killers. He tilted his head. You ready to learn what the Cosby bloodline really means? Yes. That wasn't conviction, that was desperation. Try again. Christina straightened her spine, letting something cold and ancient rise from wherever her mother had tried to bury it. When she spoke, her voice carried an edge she'd never allowed herself before. I'm not here to hide, Uncle Marcus. I'm here to reclaim what's mine and remind this city why the Cosby name used to make powerful men nervous. For the first time, Marcus Cosby smiled, a dangerous expression that held no warmth. There she is. There's Vivian's granddaughter. He gestured toward the training mats. We start now. First lesson, everything you think you know about power is wrong. Power isn't about strength or fear. It's about making people believe you'll do what others only threaten. Christina followed him onto the mats, shedding her jacket. Through the painted windows, Brooklyn morning light filtered in gray and muted, the city waking to another day of predators and prey conducting their endless dance. She was done being prey. Marcus moved without warning, testing her reflexes. Christina stumbled back, unprepared. He didn't help her up. Second lesson, he said coldly. The world doesn't wait for you to be ready. Get up. She got up. And the real education began. Kaihai Daita stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching Manhattan's lights blur in the rain. 72 hours since Christina Cosby had walked out of his ballroom, and every hour felt like a fissure spreading through carefully constructed stone. She's gone to ground in Brooklyn. 3 separate sightings, all unconfirmed. His second-in-command, Takashi, stood at a respectful distance, reading from reports that grew more useless with each passing day. The bounty has attracted attention from professional contractors. It's only a matter of time. Time. Kaihai's reflection stared back at him from the glass, dark eyes revealing nothing. How many days now since I've had to wait for anything I wanted? Takashi's silence was answer enough. The whiskey glass in Kaihai's hand shattered against the window, amber liquid streaking down the glass like golden blood. Takashi didn't flinch. He'd seen worse displays from the man who'd built an empire on controlled violence and strategic patience. What unsettled him was the loss of control itself. The Borealis are circling, Takashi said carefully. They've delayed 2 shipments, citing scheduling concerns. Dmitry Volkov has stopped returning calls. There are rumors you've become distracted. Distracted. Kaihai turned from the window, his expression perfectly composed except for something wild flickering in his eyes. Because I want to recover stolen property? She's not property, Kaihai. She's a woman who said no to you in front of every family that matters. And you responded by offering enough money to destabilize half our operations. Takashi's voice carried the weight of 15 years of loyalty. This isn't strategic. This is personal, and personal makes us vulnerable. The speed at which Kaihai moved would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know him. One moment he stood by the window, the next his hand was at Takashi's throat, slamming him against the mahogany wall with controlled brutality. Vulnerable. Kaihai's voice dropped to something lethal and quiet. Do I look vulnerable to you? Takashi met his gaze steadily, unafraid. Yes. The admission hung between them, truth sharper than any blade. Kaihai released him, stepping back as if burned by his own reaction. He'd never laid hands on Takashi before. Not in anger, not in all their years building this empire together. She should have said yes, Kaihai said finally, his voice stripped of its usual command. Any rational person would have said yes. I offered her everything, power, protection, a position beside me that women kill for. Perhaps that's the problem. Takashi adjusted his collar, voice neutral. You offered her everything except the choice to walk away. Kaihai returned to the window, watching the city that bent to his will in every way except this one infuriating thing. I've wanted businesses, territories, the removal of obstacles. I've never wanted a person before. Not like this. His reflection wavered in the rain-streaked glass. Every woman I've known has understood the transaction, what I provide, what they accept. But she looked at me like I was offering her a prison sentence. Maybe you were. I would have given her the world. The world in a cage is still a cage, Kaihai. The crime lord's jaw tightened, his hands flexing with the urge to break something else. Find her. And when you do, I want to be the one who brings her back. Not some mercenary looking for a payday. Me. I want to understand what made her think she could refuse me and survive the consequences. Takashi moved toward the door, then paused. And when you find her? What then? Kaihai stared at his city, at the empire he'd built with ruthless efficiency and cold calculation, all of it feeling hollow in the wake of 2 words spoken by a woman in a crimson dress. I don't know. That's what terrifies me. After Takashi left, Kaihai Daita remained at the window, the most powerful man in New York admitting something he'd never confessed to anyone. Christina Cosby had done more than reject him. She'd made him feel something other than control. And he didn't know if he wanted to punish her for it or possess her because of it. 3 months had carved away everything soft in Christina Cosby, leaving only edges sharp enough to cut. She moved through the converted warehouse in Red Hook with lethal grace, disarming Marcus in 4 precise movements before he could compensate for her speed. The knife clattered to the concrete floor, and for the first time since training began, her uncle smiled with genuine approval. Vivian would have been proud, he said, breathing hard. You fight like you were born to it. Maybe I was. Christina retrieved the blade, testing its balance with the casual competence of someone who'd spent countless hours learning the weight of violence. I just needed someone to show me how. The person staring back from the mirror now bore little resemblance to the financial analyst who'd walked into Kai-Hi's ballroom. Her body had become a weapon. Lean muscle earned through brutal repetition, scars mapping the education her mother had tried to deny her. But the real transformation lived in her eyes. The last traces of uncertainty burned away, replaced by calculated focus. Marcus handed her a tablet displaying a secure messaging app. The old guard is responding. Words spreading that Elena's daughter is claiming the Cosby name. 37 confirmed responses so far. Soldiers, strategists, fixers who've been waiting 20 years for this call. Christina scrolled through the names, recognizing several from her mother's red ledger. What about the families? Are they paying attention? They're watching. You take out 3 of Kai-Hi's distribution operations in 6 weeks without leaving evidence? That gets noticed. Marcus leaned against the training dummy, studying his niece with professional assessment. The Borealis think you're a ghost. The Volkovs are trying to establish contact. Even the Yakuza contingent is asking questions about who's dismantling Daida's infrastructure with surgical precision. Good. Christina's voice carried the cold satisfaction of someone executing a long-term strategy. I want them curious. I want them reassessing their alliances when they realize the Cosby organization isn't extinct. It was just dormant. She'd spent 3 months learning more than combat. Marcus had taught her the architecture of criminal enterprise, how to read territory maps like tactical documents, identify weaknesses in supply chains, exploit the psychological pressure points that made powerful men make mistakes. She'd studied her grandmother's old case files, understanding how Vivian Cosby had negotiated peace by making war too expensive to contemplate. But Christina wasn't interested in peace. Not yet. The warehouse door opened, admitting 3 figures Marcus had vouched for personally. Teresa Dominguez, her mother's former intelligence coordinator. James Chen, a logistics specialist who'd moved mountains invisibly. And André Laurent, whose particular expertise involved making problems disappear with bureaucratic elegance. They stood before Christina with the careful respect reserved for legitimate authority. And she understood this was the moment everything became real. These weren't mercenaries working for money. They were legacy operatives offering their loyalty to a bloodline they'd served once before. Thank you for coming, Christina said, her voice carrying the command her grandmother must have wielded. For 20 years, the Cosby organization existed only as a ghost story criminals told to remind themselves that empires fall. My mother disbanded us to give me a choice she never had. She met each of their eyes. I'm choosing differently. I'm choosing to rebuild what she tried to erase. Not because I want power, but because I refuse to live in a world where men like Kai-Hi Daida believe they can own people. Teresa stepped forward. What do you need from us, Miss Cosby? Christina pulled up a tactical map on the tablet, displaying Kai-Hi's remaining operations in color-coded precision. I need to show New York's underworld that the Cosby name still means something. And I need to send Kai-Hi Daita a message he can't ignore. She marked 3 locations with decisive taps. We move on these simultaneously. Clean, professional, impossible to trace back to us. I want him to understand that the woman he tried to cage has become the predator hunting him. Marcus crossed his arms, satisfaction evident in his expression. When? 72 hours. He's already unstable. His second-in-command reports internal friction. We push where he's weakest and we watch his empire fracture. The operatives nodded, already planning logistics in their minds. Christina Cosby was done running. Done hiding. The phoenix her mother had tried to keep dormant had risen from ashes that smelled of expensive cologne and shattered crystal. And she was ready to burn everything down. The first explosion lit up the Brooklyn waterfront at 2 a.m, taking out Kai-Hi's primary shipping warehouse and $3 million in product with surgical precision. By the time his security teams arrived, the attackers had vanished like smoke, leaving only the message spray painted across the surviving wall. The serpent remembers. Victor Molina's signature. Kai-Hi received the call while reviewing intelligence reports on Christina's ghost network. And the timing wasn't coincidental. Molina had been circling for months, waiting for an opening, and Kai-Hi's obsessive hunt for one woman had given the cartel leader exactly what he needed. Proof that the unshakable Daita was human after all. By dawn, 3 more operations had been hit. A safe house in Queens, burned to the foundation with 2 lieutenants barely escaping. The money laundering operation in Midtown, raided by authorities who'd clearly been fed detailed intel. Kaihai's second-largest arms shipment, intercepted at the port by Molina's people and redirected to God knows where. Takashi burst into Kaihai's office without knocking, something he hadn't done in 10 years. It's a coordinated assault. 5 fronts simultaneously. Molina's using our own vulnerability against us. Every move calculated to exploit the gaps in our defenses. He slammed a tablet on the desk showing real-time damage reports. We're hemorrhaging resources and people. This isn't opportunistic raiding. This is a planned execution. Kaihai studied the reports with cold focus, his mind already calculating countermoves and reallocating assets. Molina's been watching us. He knows we've been distracted. Distracted. Takashi's composure finally cracked. You've had 80% of our intelligence network focused on finding one woman while our actual enemies prepared for war. This isn't distraction. This is strategic suicide. The accusation hung between them like drawn steel. Kaihai's jaw tightened, but he couldn't deny the truth bleeding across every damage report. Christina Cosby had consumed his attention so completely that he'd missed the serpent coiling in the shadows. How many soldiers does Molina have positioned? Kaihai's voice remained level, professional, the mask sliding back into place. Best estimate? 200 active combatants, plus his cartel connections feeding him resources we can't match right now. He's hitting us from angles we didn't know were vulnerable. Takashi pulled up tactical maps. And he's not done. Intelligence suggests 3 more targets scheduled for tonight, including this building. Kaihai stood, moving to the weapons cabinet with practiced calm. Then we respond. Alert everyone. Full defensive protocols. We need help, Kaihai. Takashi's interruption was unprecedented. The Borealis would back us for a percentage. The Yakuza contingent owes us favors. Even the Russians would see Molina's expansion as a threat worth countering. No. The word came out flat, absolute. I don't ask for help. I don't show weakness to families who are already questioning my stability. Your pride is going to get us all killed. Kaihai's hand stilled on the pistol he was loading, and for a moment something human flickered across his features. Fear perhaps, or the dawning realization that his empire was crumbling because he'd let one woman's defiance unravel everything he'd built. She said no to me, he said quietly, almost to himself. And I made it mean more than it should have. I let it consume me. Yes, you did. Takashi's voice softened slightly. But we can still recover if you act now. Swallow your pride, make the calls, shore up our defenses. We can survive this. But not if you're still fighting a ghost while Molina destroys everything. The explosions started again before Kaihai could respond. Closer this time, the building's security alarms screaming as Molina's forces breached the outer perimeter. Through the reinforced windows, Manhattan burned with strategic fires designed to announce a new order. Kaihai Daita, the man who'd never lost control, was losing his empire because he couldn't let go of the woman who'd walked away. And Victor Molina was making sure everyone knew it. Christina watched the fires from the rooftop of her Red Hook headquarters, the Manhattan skyline burning with Victor Molina's ambition. Teresa stood beside her, tablet displaying real-time intelligence feeds from their newly rebuilt network. Molina's hit 7 operations in 12 hours. Kaihai's down 30% capacity and losing ground by the minute. Teresa's voice held professional detachment, but her eyes sought Christina's for guidance. If this continues, Daita falls within 48 hours. Molina takes Manhattan and everything attached to it. Marcus emerged from the rooftop access door, his expression grim. Our contacts are confirming what we suspected. Molina's not interested in coexistence. He's already executed 2 independent operators who refused to pledge loyalty. Bodies left in public as warnings. He moved beside Christina. If he wins this war, the city bleeds. Everything your grandmother built, the balance she died protecting, Molina will burn it all for profit and power. Christina remained silent, watching the distant smoke rise like funeral pyres. 3 months ago she would have let Kaihai fall without hesitation, would have celebrated his empire crumbling the way he tried to cage her. But 3 months of studying her grandmother's legacy had taught her something crucial. Personal vendettas were luxuries criminal leaders couldn't afford when civilian lives hung in the balance. What do we know about Molina's endgame? She asked. Teresa pulled up tactical projections. He wants the ports, the political connections, the entire infrastructure. But he operates like a conqueror, not a governor. Torture, public executions, terror tactics that make Kaihai's calculated violence look civilized by comparison. If Molina takes control, this city becomes a war zone. Then he doesn't take control. Christina's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who'd made an impossible choice. We intervene. Marcus studied his niece with sharp assessment. This isn't about saving Kaihai. God, no. Christina's laugh held no humor. This is about protecting what's mine. My city, my territory, my grandmother's legacy. Kaihai's an arrogant bastard who thought he could own me, but he maintains order. Molina's a rabid dog who'll turn Manhattan into his personal killing floor. She turned to face them both. We let Kaihai fall, we lose any chance of claiming our rightful place in this city's power structure. But if we intervene now, at his weakest moment, we announce to every family that matters that the Cosby organization is back, and we're the ones who decide the city's fate. He won't thank you for saving him, Teresa warned. I'm not looking for gratitude. I'm looking for recognition. Christina's eyes reflected the distant fires, and something predatory lived in that gaze. I want Kaihai Daita to understand that the woman he tried to cage is now the only thing standing between him and annihilation. I want him to look at me and see an equal, not a possession. Marcus's dangerous smile returned. You want to humble him. I want to show him what he could have had if he'd offered partnership instead of ownership. Christina pulled up communications on her own tablet. Contact our people. Full mobilization. We hit Molina's command center and supply lines simultaneously. Show him the Cosby organization fights with precision he can't match. She marked strategic locations with decisive taps. And send a message to Kaihai's second-in-command. Tell him reinforcements are coming, but they answer to Christina Cosby, not Kaihai Daita. When? Marcus asked, already anticipating the answer. Now. Before Molina realizes there's a third player who's been watching this entire game unfold. Christina moved toward the rooftop access, her stride carrying the confidence her grandmother must have wielded when she'd reshaped the criminal underworld. It's time to remind this city why the Cosby name used to make powerful men reconsider their ambitions. As her team mobilized with military efficiency, Christina allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. 3 months ago she'd fled Kaihai's ballroom in a crimson gown, terrified and alone. Tonight she returned to Manhattan leading an army, ready to save the man who'd tried to own her. Not because he deserved it but because she could. And that made all the difference. Kaihai's compound was a war zone when Christina's convoy arrived, gunfire echoing through the Manhattan night like deadly percussion. Molina's forces had breached the outer defenses, and bodies littered the courtyard in testimony to violence that would reshape the city's criminal hierarchy. Christina emerged from the lead vehicle in tactical black, a stark contrast to the crimson gown she'd worn 3 months ago in this same location. Her team fanned out with military precision, engaging Molina's soldiers with efficiency that spoke of extensive training and strategic superiority. Inside the compound's main hall, the same room where Kaihai had proposed and Christina had shattered his world, she found him fighting alongside Takashi against overwhelming odds. Blood stained his tailored shirt, and his normally immaculate appearance had been replaced by the raw violence of survival. He saw her and time seemed to fracture. Kaihai Daita, the man who'd spent 3 months hunting her, stared at Christina Cosby as if seeing a ghost made flesh. But this wasn't the brilliant analyst he'd tried to cage. This was something forged in fire and tempered by legacy. Her movements were fluid and lethal as she disarmed an attacker, her tactical awareness reading the battlefield with the precision his grandmother must have possessed. North entrance, 3 hostiles, Christina called out, her voice carrying command that cut through chaos. Her team responded instantly, neutralizing the threat before Kaihai could process her presence. They fell into combat rhythm without discussion, 2 tactical minds operating in perfect synchronization. Kaihai provided cover while Christina advanced on Molina's lieutenant. She cleared the corridor while Kaihai coordinated their defensive positions through hand signals. It was partnership born of necessity, but the efficiency was undeniable. They complemented each other's instincts with devastating effectiveness. When Molina himself appeared in the doorway, Raising his weapon toward Kai-Hai's exposed back, Christina moved without hesitation. Her shot dropped the cartel leader before his finger reached the trigger, the sound echoing through suddenly silent halls. Kai-Hai turned, registering that Christina had just saved his life. The fighting ended minutes later, Molina's forces retreating in disarray now that their leader was dead and reinforcements had arrived from an unexpected source. Christina's people secured the perimeter with practiced efficiency, establishing control that made it clear the Cosby organization had returned. In the settling silence, Kai-Hai faced Christina across the hall where she'd rejected him. Blood spattered the marble floors and smoke drifted through shattered windows, but neither of them moved. "You came back," he said, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "I came back for my city." Christina's weapon remained steady in her hand, trained on the man who'd put a bounty on her head. "You were just incidental to that calculation. You saved my life. I stopped Molina from taking territory that doesn't belong to him." Her eyes held no warmth, only cold assessment. "Don't confuse tactical necessity with forgiveness." Kai-Hai took a step forward and Christina's gun rose slightly, a warning. He stopped, something like respect flickering across his features for the first time. "You're not the woman I proposed to. That woman never existed. You tried to cage a fantasy." Christina moved closer, the gun now pressed against his chest, her voice dropping to something intimate and dangerous. "I'm Christina Cosby, heir to an empire you thought was extinct. I'm the granddaughter of Vivian Cosby, who rebuilt this city's criminal infrastructure when men like you were still learning to tie their shoes." She held his gaze with absolute conviction. "I didn't save you because I need you. I saved you because having you indebted to me is more useful than watching you die." For the first time in his carefully constructed life, Kai-Hai Daida understood what it felt like to be outmaneuvered by someone operating on a level he'd never anticipated. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Christina lowered her weapon, stepping back with the confidence of someone who knew she'd already won. "Now we discuss terms. Equal terms. Because the next time you think about owning me, remember this moment, when you were dying and I decided whether you lived." Takashi watched from the doorway and something like satisfaction crossed his features. The unshakable Daida had finally met his match. 2 weeks after Molina's failed assault, the criminal underworld had been forced to acknowledge a truth it hadn't confronted in 20 years. The Cosby name still carried weight that made powerful men recalculate their ambitions. Christina stood in the same ballroom where Kai-Hai had proposed, but the space felt different now. Smaller somehow, as if she'd outgrown the woman who'd walked away in terror and defiance. The chandeliers still blazed with obscene wealth, but she understood now that wealth without power was just decoration. "I was wondering when you'd come." She didn't turn when the door opened, recognizing his footsteps against marble. Kai-Hai crossed the empty ballroom, and this time there was no audience to witness their confrontation. No crime families expecting submission, no assembled empire watching for weakness. Just two people who'd nearly destroyed each other trying to understand what existed between them. "No bodyguards this time?" he asked, stopping a respectful distance away. "I don't need protection from you anymore." Christina finally turned to face him. "We both know if you wanted me dead, I'd already be a tactical problem you'd solved with characteristic efficiency." Something almost like amusement flickered in his dark eyes. "You've learned to think like us. I've learned to think like my grandmother. There's a difference." She moved toward the center of the ballroom where he'd once taken her hand with proprietary confidence. "Why are you here, Kai-Hai?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she'd never heard from him. "I need to understand why you said no. Not the obvious reasons. Freedom, autonomy, refusing to be owned. I need to know why you looked at me and saw something worth rejecting when every other person sees only what I can give them." Christina studied the man who'd nearly unraveled his empire pursuing her, and she saw past the calculated mask to the lonely truth beneath. "You want to know why I was different? You were the first person who saw me clearly, all of me, the violence and control and calculated cruelty, and still said no. Everyone else either fears me or wants something from me. You just wanted to be free of me." He moved closer, his expression unguarded in a way that would have been dangerous if anyone else were watching. "It wasn't about wanting you as a possession. It was about finally finding someone who could stand beside me without being consumed by what I am. But you offered me a cage, not partnership." "I know. I didn't understand the difference until you walked away. Kaihai's admission hung between them like a peace offering. And then you returned leading an army, saved my life, and made it clear you didn't need my permission to claim power in this city. You became what I thought I wanted, but on your terms, not mine. Christina considered him for a long moment, then extended her hand, not in surrender but in negotiation. I rejected your proposal because I won't be anyone's queen. But I'll be your equal. Different territories, mutual respect, a balance of power that serves us both. He took her hand, and the gesture carried none of the proprietary confidence from 3 months ago. This was acknowledgement between predators who'd learned the cost of trying to tame each other. Partners then. Not lovers, not spouses. Just two people who understand that control isn't the same as connection. Agreed. Christina's grip was firm, matched his pressure exactly. You rule your empire, I rule mine. We present a united front when it serves our interests and maintain our independence when it doesn't. 3 days later, the summit of New York's criminal elite convened in neutral territory, the historic restaurant where her grandmother had once negotiated the peace that ended a decade of bloodshed. Christina arrived in crimson silk, though this time she wore it as armor, not decoration. Kaihai waited at the entrance, impeccable in his tailored black suit. They entered together, and the room fell silent with recognition of what this represented. The Daita organization and the reborn Cosby Empire, standing side by side not through marriage or submission, but through mutual respect forged in combat and compromise. As they took their positions at the head table, Christina felt her grandmother's legacy settling around her shoulders like an inherited crown. Kaihai caught her eye, and something passed between them that might have been understanding or respect, or simply the acknowledgement that they'd both been transformed by the collision of their wills. The city belonged to them now, not because either had conquered the other but because they'd learned the difference between possession and partnership. And that balance, dangerous and delicate, was the foundation of a new criminal order. Christina's story proves that the most powerful word in any language is no, especially when spoken to someone who's never heard it before. If you enjoyed watching her transform from a woman running for her life into a queen ruling her empire, then you need to see my next video. Another incredible story of power, betrayal, and transformation is waiting for you. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. See you in the next one.